So our theme tonight is centering prayer, compassion, and self-care. And so what I would like to do is, well, we got a little quote here from a French novelist and philosopher, Léon Bloy. Joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. This often gets misattributed to Teilhard de Chardin. And I think Teilhard probably doesn't, have a strong feeling one way or the other, but the line actually does come from a letter that Léon Bloy wrote. And probably Teilhard at some point quoted Bloy. So there you go. So if you ever see it attributed to Teilhard, the deeper attribution goes to Bloy. But let's begin with with a commercial. So before we get into this, I figured I'd do this at the front end. A reminder for those who are here for the first time that I have this, or we have, I should say, this ongoing series of videos, Zoom calls that are then recorded as part of my Patreon program and also my Substack newsletters. So if you are a paid subscriber to either Patreon or to Substack, then you will get access to the regular scheduled calls. We will have two more this month, one on April the 18th and one on April the 22nd. So if you would like to participate, I hope you will consider either becoming a paid subscriber to my Substack newsletters and or to Patreon. Patreon is the best value because if you join Patreon, then I will throw in a subscription to Substack as well, so you don't have to, subscribe both. And also through Patreon, you get to see the recordings. So if you're a subscriber to Substack, you can participate in the Zoom calls, but if you actually want to watch the recordings, then Patreon is the way to go. So I just leave that there for you. If you do want to join, the price, it just starts at $11 a month, so it's not too onerous, I don't think. And there are different tiers, but the basic tier is $11 a month. And you can just go to patreon.com/Carl McColeman to learn more about that program. All right, the commercial is out of the way, so let's get going with the actual program. And again, this is based on a newsletter, a post from Substack that was posted last week. You don't have to be a paid subscriber to read it, so I would encourage you, if you haven't already read it at some point, to go on to the Fullness of Joy Substack newsletter. The URL is simply my name, carlmccoleman.net. And the article is called Above the Boats on the River, the Sky, or How Do We Learn to Let Go of Judgment in Our Daily Contemplative Practice. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is based on this article, hopefully maybe a slightly different take. And what I want to begin with, in the article I quote a wonderful poem from a wonderful poet, Shalon Harkin, a young woman who lives in the Pacific Northwest and who presents herself as a mystical poet. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of times when poets will describe themselves that way, I kind of twitch a little. But Shalon is the real deal. And so I really, if you're not familiar with her work, I would encourage you to check her out. The poem that I want to read to you right now is called The Worst Thing. The Worst Thing by Shalon Harkin. And here we go. The worst thing we ever did was put God in the sky, out of reach, pulling the divinity from the leaf, sifting out the holy from our bones, insisting God isn't bursting dazzlement through everything we've made, a hard commitment to see as ordinary, stripping the sacred from everywhere to put in a cloud man elsewhere, prying closeness from your heart. The worst thing we ever did was take the dance and the song out of prayer, made it sit up straight and cross its legs, removed it of rejoicing, wiped clean its hip sway, its questions, its ecstatic yowl, its tears. The worst thing we ever did is pretend God isn't the easiest thing in this universe, available to every soul in every breath. So from Shalon Harkin, The Worst Thing. And I hope that poem is pretty self-evident why it is such a wonderful gift to all of us. But just a reminder that we do have a tendency, as I mentioned in my post, we have a tendency to make God difficult. We put God far away from us. We project onto God authority systems and hierarchies and dualisms and kind of a philosophy of reward and punishment. We do all sorts of little kind of tricks in our mind to take this mystery that we call God. And I know the word God doesn't work for everybody. So if that word doesn't work for you, I invite you to replace maybe the word spirit or the word divine, the word, love with a capital L. There are all sorts of ways we can name the mystery. But it's really interesting that she begins by saying, the worst thing we ever did was to put God in the sky. Because what I want to do tonight is to make the case that it's okay for God to be in the sky as long as God isn't just in the sky. And maybe that what we need to do is we need to be looking for the sky within as a way to reconnect with the true Spirit of God. So I'm just going to run through a few quotations from this article, just some pull quotes, just to, for those of you who haven't read it, to kind of give you the lay of the land. And then we'll take it from there. So we work just as hard to make contemplation difficult as we do to make God difficult. And what I mean by this is that there is something that I have noticed over the years, and I've been a presenter of centering prayer, so somebody who teaches the basics of centering prayer for about 7 years now, and a practitioner for many years before that. I like to brag that I was maybe one of the last ones to actually get an introduction to centering prayer from Thomas Keating. It was the last time he was in Atlanta, which was in 2005. And I had been practicing before that, but it was still really cool to actually go to a workshop with Thomas Keating. Of course, the place was filled. I mean, it was hundreds and hundreds of people. But so this has been a part of my spiritual practice for quite a while. And something that I have noticed over the years is that so many people have difficulty with this practice. It is a simple, simple practice, and yet people again and again and again will confide in me, at any rate, that they find it very difficult and very challenging. And what people will often say to me is, I'm no good at this, which kind of breaks my heart. And so I ask, well, what do you mean? And it always seems to go back to one of two things. And one is, I don't do it enough. And that's not going to be our theme tonight. So we can maybe, focus on that some other time. But the other thing that people will say is, I'm just not very good at this. I don't do it very well. I don't do it enough, or I don't do it very well. Seems to be the feedback that I get from so many people who try their hand at centering prayer. And I think many people who come to that point often will give up on it. And will say, oh, it isn't for me, and then they'll just move on to some other kind of spiritual practice. And listen, I understand that there are many different spiritual practices out there, and that it's good to do the practice that makes your heart sing. So I'm totally in support of that. But let's just say, I don't want people, or it makes me sad when people give up on the centering prayer practice prematurely. So part of what I'm trying to do tonight is to make the case that maybe with just a few tweaks, and maybe with a new metaphor, we can let go of that tendency to assume that we're doing this badly because the experience is maybe not what we were expecting it to be. So with that, let's move on here. Let's see, where am I? Okay. So yeah, we often fall in. I know I do this. I mean, and again, I've been doing this for years and years, and I still fall into this trap of judging the experience. Doing a centering prayer practice and then afterwards saying, well, that was a mess. My mind was all over the place. My heart was just turbulent. I couldn't settle in. I was constantly thinking about whatever, TV show I watched last night, or the book that I'm reading right now, or, what I have to work on. This is tax season, so thinking about taxes, whatever the case may be. I'm going to a funeral on Saturday, thinking about that. So many different things that can show up. And so we name the experience, we name it wrong, we name it bad, we name it inferior, we name it not very good. And I think this gets in the way of the beauty of the centering prayer experience. So it's like getting cranky at the weather because the sky is not always sunny. And listen, I know, especially if you want to do something outdoors and suddenly the rain is falling, it's easy to get cranky. Naturally, we may prefer a beautiful sunlit sky to a tornado, to use an extreme example. But there's also a reality that, hey, if there's a little bit of rain, or if the sky is overcast, or, the sun sets, there's no point in judging it. It is simply what is happening. It's simply what presents itself to us. And so when the inspiration actually comes from Martin Laird, from his wonderful book called Into the Silent Land, where he compares the practice of contemplation to a mountain with weather around the mountain. And he says, we forget that we are the mountain. So the mountain becomes a metaphor for our being anchored in the divine presence. And then the weather is the metaphor for just whatever is arising in our consciousness. Our thoughts, our feelings, our daydreams, our distractions. And he says we get so caught up in the weather, and not just watching the weather, but judging the weather, that we forget the beautiful mountain that is the heart of the practice. And so what became interesting to me was taking that metaphor and then pairing it with something that I have seen especially in Buddhist writers, but I do think there are parallels in the Christian tradition as well, and that is of comparing, the human consciousness, the human mind, the human heart, comparing it or using the metaphor of the sky to kind of make sense of the inner experience. So maybe after exiling God to the sky, the second worst thing we have done is to exile the sky out of us. And what I mean by this is to meet the sky, the inner sky, not with curiosity, but with criticism. So that's what I mean by this notion of exile, that we bring judgment to whatever it is that is arising within us from moment to moment to moment. We bring judgment, and I would argue maybe even a subtle kind of aggression, a subtle hostility. We get mad at ourselves because we have distracting thoughts. We get frustrated because our mind is a monkey. We get annoyed because we aren't finding the still place, the peaceful place of inner silence. And maybe that's getting in the way of embracing the beauty and the fullness of the centering prayer experience, which is an experience that seems to always be evolving and always changing, just like the sky is always evolving and always changing. So what if instead of judging that experience of contemplation, we learn to simply watch it, watch what is arising? The same way we can look out of the window to gaze into the sky and see, so what's the weather like today? Is it sunny? Is it rainy? Is it overcast? What's going on outside? Again, we began our time together with a period of centering prayer. If you're new to centering prayer, there are 4 basic guidelines that contemplative outreach, the ministry that Thomas Keating founded, has developed as a simple introduction to the centering prayer practice. And so it is certainly not my place to try to edit or add to the guidelines, but I'm suggesting maybe we need an unofficial fifth guideline. So again, underlining the word unofficial. But this fifth guideline that I'm suggesting is that whatever arises during centering prayer, may we learn to meet it with curiosity and not criticism. To practice accepting the centering prayer experience simply as it is, to refrain from whatever impulse we might have to judge it. So learning to surrender the impulse to judgment the same way we surrender whatever thoughts show up like boats on a river, using the sacred word to get off that boat and back onto the riverbank. So I'm not suggesting we get rid of the boats in the river as a metaphor, but I'm wondering if we could expand the metaphor, because after all, beneath the boats in the river is the sky. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's cloudy, sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's night. If we can expand our field of awareness to accept and acknowledge how the sky is always changing, maybe that can give us the image we need to let go of that impulse to judge and to replace it again with a spirit of watchful curiosity. So when we meet whatever comes our way in contemplation, an avalanche of thoughts, graced moments of gentle serenity, if we meet it with openness and acceptance rather than self-criticism or self-judgment, then we are practicing hospitality rather than judgment toward our own self, toward our own mind and our own heart. It makes the practice non-aggressive. It makes the practice truly a practice that is in alignment with the peace that passes all understanding. But that means meeting even our imperfections, even the noisiness and sometimes the distractedness of our inner thought generation, with kindness rather than evaluation or accusation or blame. So what I want to do now, and this again comes straight out of the Substack article about above boats on the river, the sky. I present 13 different images of the sky in that article, and what I would like to do now is the next few slides, or maybe it's 12. I've lost count. I think it's 12 images in the Substack, but I actually have 13 tonight, so you get a bonus one for being on the Zoom call. And I just want to present these to you. I'm going to offer just very brief commentary, and I invite you just to enjoy these images. These are all just, they're stock photo images. In fact, I think a few of them might even be AI generated. Whatever you may think about AI, we'll just kind of, let that boat go down the river for right now. Only one of them I actually photographed myself, and it's the second one that you'll see. All the rest are just stock photos from online. But let's just marvel at how dynamic the sky is, and the many, many different faces of the sky that we can encounter just in the course of our lives, in the course of a day, an evening, just the experience of being alive, and then we'll consider how we can bring that into our prayer life. So we begin with twilight. And I love this particular image because of the shooting star. It's kind of a nice little touch. But twilight, is the time when the sky is dancing between darkness and light. You think about, we so often think of the day as beginning with twilight. I think in the West, we tend to think of a day beginning at dawn, at sunrise. But a lot of indigenous and traditional cultures, including the Hebrew culture, the day actually begins at dusk. It begins at the twilight that leads into the night. So darkness before light. And that's why you find, I used to live in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and all the businesses would shut down Friday night at sunset. That's when the Sabbath began. It didn't begin, at midnight. It didn't begin at dawn the next morning. It actually began at dusk. So twilight represents an initiation into the new day. It represents an initiation from day into night, from night into day. And it represents, again, that kind of balance or that kind of dance between day and light. It's beautiful. It's the most beautiful time for the sky, filled with bold colors and maybe even a planet or two or a shooting star, maybe the new moon sometimes or the waning moon dancing across the horizon. Our next image, and this comes from above the Gulf of Mexico when I was down in Florida a couple of months ago. The sunny, clear sky, a sky that is just azure blue, just the chalice of light. It's a wonder to behold. You know, it's kind of almost an understatement to say a sky like that is beautiful. The beauty implies radiant loveliness that seems to touch everything when the sky is bright and cloudless, with only the sun illuminating it, like we see here. And of course, over the water, you get the added bonus of the glistening of the water. Our next image is of cumulus clouds. You know, clouds that will dance across the otherwise clear sky. Often they show up when the weather is fair, the sun is shining, and so you get that beautiful contrast of the glistening of the sun and then the shadow with the part of the cloud that is kind of hidden from the sunlight. I like to think that the cloud of unknowing, that medieval mystical manual, the manual of contemplation, that the cloud that the author is referring to is a cumulus cloud. Now that's just my imagination. And the author, of course, cautions against, he says, this is a metaphorical cloud, it's not a literal cloud. But in my mind, the metaphorical cloud is like a cumulus cloud. These are the clouds that children love to play, finding images in the cloud. This one looks like a puppy dog. This one looks like a horse. This one looks like, a little girl, or whatever the case may be. And so we impute wonder and we impute play and almost joyfulness into the sky with the cumulus clouds in it. Then our next image is of a breezy sky, and that's hard to capture in a still photograph. But I hope this particular image with the grass kind of moving as the breeze is flowing across it can kind of capture the spirit of it. And we see a little bit of cloud cover, so the sky's maybe not quite as clear, but the wind gives it a sense of presence, of almost a tactile quality to the sky. The sky is kissing our face. And so, of course, the wind is an ancient metaphor for the Spirit of God. The word in the Hebrew creation story, the Spirit is over the waters. It's like a mighty wind is blowing over the waters, but you could even translate that as the breath of God is blowing over the water. So it's a very delicious pun there. Wind, breath, and spirit all seem to come from the same root word in several languages. I mean, in English, think about respiration, inspiration, and of course, spirit. So in Greek, you have pneuma, pneumatic, breath and spirit. So it shows up again. It shows up in Irish. It shows up in Hebrew. So it's almost like the spirit-filled sky. Now the sky is getting a lot more dramatic. Here we have an overcast sky, really quite a dramatic overcast sky. It looks like it's going to rain. How many times have we said that when we're presented with a sky like this? Or it looks like it's going to storm. We better take cover, especially if you're out hiking or something like that. This can be dramatic. I mean, this image is obvious. It can be foreboding. It's not like the carefree wonder of the sunlit or the cumulus cloud sky. It's like music shifting from a major to a minor key. The sky seems somber, pensive, maybe even a little dangerous. But then there's the rainfall, and again, it's kind of hard to see here. But if you can kind of notice in the in the distance there, and you can see that the horizon, I don't know if it's water or soil, but the horizon is kind of blurry because of the rainfall. So who doesn't love the movie Singing in the Rain? I think there is, or what's that old song about if you love pina coladas and getting caught in the rain? There is something romantic about the rain. even though a lot of times it's like, I don't want to get rained on. You know, this is a new suit or a new dress. The last thing I need is for it to get soaked. I mean, so we do have that almost cat-like aversion to being caught in the rain. But then there's also something a little almost chaotic about it. It's like it's breaking the rules a little bit to be out there playing or getting caught in the rain. And when the rain falls, the ions in the air gives it just an invigorating feel. It almost feels electric. And that, of course, takes us to our next image. Oop, where am I? Why is my sky not? There we go. And that is, of course, a thunderstorm, where truly the drama kicks in. And I love this particular. I looked at lots and lots of images for all of these pictures. This was the one I picked for the thunderstorm. Obviously, you have the cityscape beneath it, but look at how dramatic the clouds are. And that sense of power from those multiple lightning bolts. You know, isn't it awe-inspiring? You can see why the ancient, Greeks and I suppose other cultures would associate their father deity Zeus or Jupiter with the god of thunder. You know, the kind of hurling the lightning bolts becomes this kind of metaphor for the all-powerful divine. And so this can be terrifying. It can be frightening. Thunder can frighten animals, can frighten small children. It can startle even adults, especially when it's so close. So here we have, something that brings us into awe and reminds us of our own humility, our own littleness, just by the sheer drama that it represents. And then we get into extreme weather. And of course, we have hurricanes and we have tornadoes, cyclones. This is quite a dramatic image. I hope this is an AI image. If it isn't an AI image, that photographer was an idiot. I don't know. I know there are storm chasers out there, people who love to get close to storms, but I would not want to be anywhere near this storm. That the incredible destructive power, but again, the awe-inspiring power that a storm like this represents. Just if we need a reminder of how little we are in the grand scheme of things, I think a tornado or hurricane really can do the trick. But storms, like anything else, any of these other images, they don't last forever, do they? And so let's move now from day to night. And, we began with twilight. Well, we kind of moved from twilight into day, so it's almost like, the sunrise twilight. But let's imagine now we've gone through the dusk twilight, and we've moved into a beautiful moonlit night. I remember I used to live in the country in Tennessee, and I loved when the moon was full, because the town that I lived in didn't have a lot of street lights, so there were a lot of streets that were just pitch dark when it was a new moon or an overcast sky. But when the moon was full, it was like a little fairyland. There was just enough light that you could go out at night and you could see to walk around. And it really was beautiful. I can see why the moon is so associated with the romance. The Van Morrison song, "It's a Wonderful Night for a Moon Dance." It's a wonderful night for romance. This idea of kissing under the moon. It's almost archetypal, isn't it? So, so we had that beautiful quality too. And then starlight, even when the moon is new, and it's not apparent in the sky, or it's before the moon rises or after the moon sets, a beautiful clear night is just, filled with stars, is truly a wonder to behold. I have only, I'm a city dweller, and I've only seen the Milky Way a handful of times in my life, but I was recently in Hawaii, and we were able to see the Milky Way when we were in Hawaii, and I remember my wife was just so entranced. We had to pull the car over. We were driving home from the church where I was speaking, and it was dark, and again, not a lot of streetlights out in the country. There was the Milky Way in all of its glory. We had to stop. We had to go out. She insisted on taking pictures. The pictures weren't nearly as impressive as just seeing it firsthand. But still, that just incredible sense. Talk about, feeling little, knowing that you are actually staring into the galaxy. Because what is the Milky Way? The Milky Way is the galaxy. In fact, that's why we say our galaxy is the Milky Way galaxy. So that beautiful sense of billions and billions of starlight, every one of those, like the sun, but so infinitely far away that we are actually looking at light that is what? Hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And it has just taken so long to travel across interstellar space to reach us. And then the northern lights, and again, living in Georgia, I've never seen the northern lights here in Georgia. I've only seen them when I was in Minnesota. It's a rare treat for people who live in certain parts of the world. Of course, people who live maybe up north or far to the south, it might not be quite as dramatic for you. But such beauty against such splendor. Obviously you're getting into solar electromagnetic activity going on, and it's God's artistry. It's just sheer beauty. When I remember seeing the northern lights when I was at the Boundary Waters of Minnesota, and the whole sky was filled, and my heart was filled. It was just filled with utter awe. And then the last image I have in the article, I talk about the pitch black sky. And I just realized, I could just throw up an image of just black, but I wanted there to be a little bit of drama in the image. So I found this image of lightning across an otherwise pitch black sky, just to, by the contrast, to give us a sense of what we've got here. And that is the sky, and it's probably an overcast sky, new moon, overcast. But again, it just gives us a sense that our eyes are even failing us. It's almost like being in a cave without light. And again, we're almost, at that point, we're almost visually impaired, aren't we? We have to rely on hearing and on touch to find our way. And so it is yet one other little reminder of our own humility. And so those are the images that I mentioned in the Substack post. But I thought we'll just have one more. And that, of course, is a sky with a rainbow in it. The last time I saw a double rainbow, I was actually in Ireland, so several years ago. And I've seen a few over the years, and it's always such a treat. If you haven't seen one, I hope you will be blessed by a beautiful double rainbow at some point. I can see why the ancients saw the rainbow as representing a promise from God, a promise of God's love and God's care and God's mercy. Because it really is just a sense of wonder and of beauty. So friends, the sky is an invitation, I believe, to remember that our experience in centering prayer is as changeable as the sky, as changeable as the weather. That what we may experience literally can be different from minute to minute and certainly from day to day. It's going to be shaped by the drama in our lives. It's going to be shaped by what's on our mind, what's on our heart. It's going to be shaped by what's going on in the world, political situations, other things that may just be showing up in our awareness. Kenneth Leach always said contemplation has a context. And so the context of what is going on in our family, in our neighborhood, in the world at large is going to impact our experience within. And it's silly to assume it won't. And so just a few thoughts to wrap up the presentation so we can then move into some conversation. And the first thing is that I think when we experience self-judgment in our prayer practice, I think it's important to remember that we learned to be judgmental. We probably learned it as children. For a lot of us, it's pretty baked in. I know it's pretty baked in with me. But still, if we learned it, that means we can unlearn it. That means we can learn something else. And so I just want there to be a glimmer of hope here, that if you struggle with kind of self-criticism during your centering prayer practice, it is possible to move beyond that and to let go of that and to learn a more spacious or open, notice the sky metaphors here, spacious or open way of entering into your centering prayer practice. Images like sky, night, cloud, light, wind, and weather are widely used not only in Christianity but in other traditions as well. So these are interfaith images for the meditating mind, for the contemplative heart, for our inner experience within. In my article, I talk about the concept of the firmament, which goes back to the ancient idea that the sky was a dome. And so there was this firm quality to the sky. We now know that that's not true. We know that the sky simply, it is the upper limit of the earth. It shades off into outer space. But what I would like to suggest is that when we meditate and when we pray, our inner experience is held by the firmament, quote unquote, of our body, of our brain, of our skull, of our heart. And so we have an inner firmament, and that inner firmament, however we experience it, it has its own quote unquote sky. That doesn't mean that when you meditate, you're necessarily going to see a blue sky with clouds. I suppose you can imagine that. But whatever it is you do experience is like the physical sky, like the earth's sky, is something that is going to continually evolve. And often can be very awe-inspiring and very challenging, but also can be very beautiful. And then the point is not to visualize these metaphors, and I think I just touched on that, but to simply allow them to be an invitation for us, to open our hearts and our minds to the many dimensions of contemplative practice. So that's the invitation here. And okay, I think that's the last slide. Yes, it is. So I'm going to end the slides because I would like to see you guys, at least those of you who have your video on. So there we go. Hi, everyone. And I have some prompts. So let me get my cheat sheet here. So what I would love to do, let's see, how are we doing on time? Okay, we've got about 20 minutes. As usual, I was long-winded, so I apologize for that. But at least we have a few minutes. We're a bigger group than normal tonight, but, and I was toying, should we do breakout groups? But I'm an introvert, and I don't like breakout groups. I'll be honest with you. So those of you who do like breakout groups, we're not going to do breakout groups tonight. Those of you who don't like them can, So the problem I have with breakout groups is then you're kind of expected to talk and to contribute. And I want to just have this to be a safe place for people who simply want to listen. It's okay to just listen. But for people who would like to either ask me a question, comment on this metaphor of the sky, or would like to share some of your own experience, I do want to have the space to do that. Once again, we can talk about you can post in the chat if you want to remain shy, if you want to keep your video off, post in the chat. But you can also raise your hand, using Zoom, kind of metaphorically raise your hand, or you can, wave at me. Either way is fine. So I want to begin just to see, I see William's already got his hand up. Okay, he's ready to roll. But the question I'm going to ask, and William, I'll go ahead and call on you first. But if you have any initial thoughts or ideas or questions in response to the slides. William, go ahead and unmute yourself, and love to hear from you.
Hi, Carl. Bill Brennan.
Yeah, Bill. Okay. Hi.
Really appreciate you so much. Pray for you a lot because of your generosity and you're just very inspirational.
Thank you.
Couple things. I kind of picture myself as the sky and the thoughts of the clouds going by.
Okay.
So it's kind of similar to what you're saying, and it helps, similar to the boat idea. But the other thing is, I don't know if you know, there's a thing on Facebook, a group on Facebook called the International Cloud Appreciation Society,
Oh, really?
which I am a proud member.
Okay.
And
Okay.
people put up pictures like what you were doing, except for that, I think that's their personal pictures.
Uh-huh.
And they're absolutely, you got to pray when you're looking at them because God is so creative.
If you go to the Substack post, there's actually 4 images that all of which I took from the exact same place, looking out over the Gulf of Mexico, and I posted them there because again they're 4 different in the exact same sky, but the clear sky, which I did show you tonight, and then various kind of cloud formations in them. So yeah, whether it's just a pretty little cumulus cloud that looks like a pony, or it's the frightening reality of a tornado, or anything in between. And your, Bill, your concept, the mind is the sky, the thoughts are the clouds, straight out of Buddhism. That is a classic
Straight out of
Buddhist.
where? Oh,
Buddhism,
really? Yeah.
the Dharma, yeah, a number of Buddhist writers use that exact image. So yeah,
Thank you.
thank you very much. I noticed Don had posted something in the chat, so let me go to that. Meditation challenges, approach avoidance towards our journey, bringing heaven together in ourselves, the mountain and the sky. Yeah, the union of it, kind of, let's not be dualistic here. And even with the sky and the clouds, let's try to not be dualistic about that. Because I think the danger here is we can be aggressive towards the clouds the same way we get aggressive towards the boats. That when the clouds show up, the clouds show up. A sky with a cumulus cloud in it is a beautiful sky. Even an overcast sky has its own beauty. And I suppose even a tornado has a fierce beauty. I want to appreciate that from a long ways away. But the goal here is to surrender the impulse towards judgment, because I think the judgment is a type of self-aggression. It's kind of, it's criticizing ourselves. It's telling ourselves we're not very good at meditation. And that is just a misunderstanding. And when we learn to appreciate whatever arises, we're actually empowered to be available when we do get those clear skies, or the sunny sky, the cumulus clouds, those moments that we think of as particularly graced in the prayer experience. So challenged in a time when patience has been forgotten, the time to appreciate nature changeable, but always is. And then you mentioned Thoreau and Whitman, and I know your boy Aldous Huxley. I mean, a number of such amazing writers. In the article, I quote Pema Chodron, I quote Songyal Rinpoche, of course Martin Laird. So many wonderful teachers. The cloud. Think about the two great classics of darkness in the Christian contemplative tradition: the cloud of unknowing, the dark night of the soul, both using those sky metaphors to move into challenging times in our prayer practice. Any other questions or comments? Well then, let me ask, and this is something, again, if you want to share this out loud, or if you feel better just putting it in the chat. But I'm just curious, we just did centering prayer. What is your current weather report? Are you experiencing sunny skies? Are you experiencing cloudy skies? Are you experiencing nightfall? Again, being playful with this, kind of being metaphorical, allowing your sky to be whatever it is. And if you find that your mind is just racing, isn't that just like an overcast sky? Or your heart is heavy with emotion, maybe that's like a thunderstorm. However you want to, it's your analogy to use the way you want. But let's see. Kelly writes, oh, and I love it. Maria mentions a snowy sky. That's absolutely beautiful. But Kelly writes, centering prayer is an opportunity to empty myself to make room for the divine to work on me. And that is classic centering prayer theology. So I totally agree with you and affirm that this gesture of letting go. And I think what this talk tonight is really about is letting go of self-judgment. Sometimes we work really hard at letting go all the other thoughts, but we hold on to that self-judgment. And then at the end of the period we say, well, that wasn't a very good prayer period. Or you go to your teacher and you say, I'm not very good at this. It's like we're holding on to judgment. So yeah, this gesture of letting go, this gesture of consent, this gesture of release, part of that practice is releasing the criticism as well, especially the criticism that we turn in on ourselves. Fog, absolutely. Fog is certainly another example. That's the overcast sky right there in the middle. And I like to say that when you're in the fog, you are in the cloud of unknowing. And so, Sometimes, yeah, the cloud is way up there in the sky and we kind of appreciate it from a distance. Sometimes the cloud is right here and right now. I lived for 5 years on the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee, and boy, did we have a lot of foggy days and foggy nights. And when the night was foggy, I mean, it was not safe to drive. You had to really, really be extremely careful when you were driving home. There were times when I literally had the door open so that I could watch the line on the road to make sure I wasn't crossing over the road. It was literally, and of course you had to have your lights on low, because if they were on high, they would just shine right back at you, and you could only go 5 miles an hour. So it was not for the faint of heart, but there's a metaphor in there about our prayer practice as well, I would think. Let's see. What is the difference? Stephen asked a question. What is the difference between frustration and thirst? You know, I'm going to put it out to the group. Is one a metaphor that can help us to understand the other? Is one specifically about water and the other one's about emotion? I mean, there's a lot of ways we can approach that question. If anybody wants to jump in, please feel free.
My sense is frustration is my judgment.
Frustration is your self-judgment, okay? And
And then he said, what was the other option?
thirst.
Thirst is desire and knowing that God loves me enough to want to quench my thirst.
Yeah. So thirst is related to desire. Frustration is something that either we create or circumstances create that thwart that desire. Okay, that's an interesting answer. I also realize Ingrid is either Ingrid or Jamil. I'm never sure which one has your hand up. So hey guys, you need to unmute yourself though.
Thank you, Carl, so much that you covered, so much food for thought, and just a lot. I take a lot of notes because you start off with chill and hearken. God isn't the easiest thing in this universe. It's the worst thing we did. And as a person who, when you want to think positively and you want to know God, and you can't and you don't. And I know a lot of people who weren't even raised in churches and I don't know how they got that concept of God out there, but just try to say God loves you. He's in you. He came to you. And however, Jamila and I started off kind of as Buddhists, and then we followed Sri Ravi Shankar, but it was all meditation. It was all just emptying ourselves. And it's scary when you begin, because we both found that a lot of stuff comes up, and we know people who say, like, when you've been pushing it all down, it's like you said, it's like the dark night, and but when you stick with it, and I'm sticking with it, but there's times the weather changes, and I'm really working on the non-self judgment. But I think that's why Jesus to me said, don't judge, don't judge others, and surrender to me. I love you, even though you're a mess. I love you, though you've got, and that doesn't mean I'm not telling you go and just, he's encouraging us, but he's loving us. And he's saying, the more that you focus on that part of you you don't like, or the less compassion you have for yourself, the less compassion you'll have for others. And I am here to say I love you. And anyway, so centering prayer has been something that I value, because of the stillness, which to me is still a mystery. I can't say I know, like, oh, sometimes I think I'm in the stillness. I'm in the stillness. Just like, am I ever going to just be quiet? Yeah. But thank you for this opportunity to, share.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. And Dan, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I have a comment to make that might be a little nerdy, but it might be helpful for some. That concept of the sky as a dome over the firmament and all. It's interesting to see how our concept of the heavens uh, as humanity has changed over the years. It was that dome for so long, and then with Newton and Galileo and so forth, we then saw ourselves as a planet in a orbital solar system. Um, and then um, we thought of ourselves as our sun being in a galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy.
Mhm.
Okay, so that broadened us to now the sky was a galaxy. It wasn't until the 1920s that we understood that there were other galaxies.
Mhm. Mhm.
The Hubble was the one who figured that out, and the Andromeda Galaxy. If you look in an old astronomy book, it's the Andromeda Nebula.
Mhm.
They didn't know there was any other galaxy but the Milky Way.
Right.
And so now, now we know there's millions of galaxies out there. And in the process, our concept of, if you thought God was just kind of hovering up in the dome, you had to keep pushing back and got further and further and further away. And finally, you got to be left with just a sheer awe of the tremendous size of the universe, and that God, is in all of it. Someday we may find intelligence elsewhere in the universe, uh, clear evidence of it. I don't mean UFOs or whatever. And boy, that'll just blow our mind even further. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
but I want to, even though I have a lot of science background, I find I must keep the notion of the sky as a dome and God as the guy in the sky. Even though I want to reject that as a literal image, it's still a powerful mythical image,
Mhm.
and we need to hold on to myth. That's it.
And that's one of the reasons, like I said, I love that Shalon Harkin poem. I'm going to read it one more time. Yeah, that's how we're going to close tonight because it's such a beautiful poem. But I want to I want to say it's okay that God is in the sky, especially when the sky is in us. And that, that I think what she's saying is the worst thing we ever did was to exile God to the sky. And I totally agree with her there. That if God is only in the sky, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. But when the God that is bigger than all those galaxies is also the spirit that's nestled in our heart, that's holographic. But it's like an Escher's painting of the universe. But then the sky god is not is not some alien, but is actually an intimate part of us. That I think is an appropriate image of the sky god. And yes, Dan, I'm a Tolkien nerd. I think myth is really essential to all of this stuff. So I'm conscious of time, so I do want to. Don, did you have your hand up or? Okay. Did anybody else? And I see Ingrid's back, but I just want to make sure other people have a chance. So let's see what's in the chat. So Nance, so Beth is, yeah, Joan talks about that a little bit of the unpredictableness of meditation is meaningful one day and chaotic and busy the next. That's the sky metaphor in a nutshell, isn't it? And so, learning to appreciate that. And that doesn't mean we don't strive for, the release, that the empty sky is kind of the goal. Even though I believe there really isn't a goal, the goal is simply to be present to the one who loves us through it all. But there is a joy and a beauty, a special beauty that comes in the empty sky. So it's a paradox, isn't it? It's that desire, back to Stephen and the thirst, that desire for the clear, empty blue sky, but non-judgment when the storms show up, when the rains fall, and oh, the sun's going down, and so now we're in the dark. All of that is simply just part of the process, and learning to hold that with love and with grace and hospitality, even while we maybe still thirst for or still desire for that more radiance. Let's see. So So my metaphor for the cloud of unknowing is the sandstorm I've been caught in between Phoenix and Tucson. I've never been in a Western sandstorm, but I can only imagine. Oh, and Joanna writes, the most beautiful sunrises and sunsets have clouds. If they don't have clouds, they're less magnificent. I think that's wonderful too. So, and Nance says, that that her analogy is a stormy cold front, a wind shift and dip in temperature, inviting the soul to release all to the wind, to flow deeper still. So, so yes, that this is, it's, people will ask me, I've had this say to me, it seems like nothing happens during centering prayer. Why should I keep doing it? And Nance mentions this in the chat, that oftentimes the fruit of a contemplative practice shows up at other times during the day. I hit a curb with my car and I ended up with 2 flat tires. And I was so frustrated. Of course, it was expensive. It was like, money I didn't really have to spend. And there I was having to buy 2 tires. And I was so frustrated. And my wife said to me, you are so much calmer than you would have been if this had happened 10 or 20 years ago. And I'm like, well, either I'm getting older and mellower or the centering prayer is making a difference. It's one or the other. But I do believe that's what happens when we sustain this kind of a practice. It can leaven itself into our experience so that even when life throws us a curveball, and that doesn't mean we don't get upset. I was upset. When I had those 2 flat tires, I was upset. But her point was my upsettedness, if that's a word, didn't have the same edge to it that maybe it had, earlier in my adult life. So, so yeah, you can't hide from yourself. A lot comes up. That's what Thomas Keating calls the unloading of the unconscious. So is not the sky always perfect? Absolutely. I think that's the point, Don, is that the sky is always perfect, but we bring our judgment. So that's the thing we have to be mindful of. And yes, the metaphor of transcendence and immanence, that's the God in our heart, is the God that holds the universe. So I know we need to wrap this up. I just, again, let me just end with a brief commercial. If you're new here tonight, if you're just visiting, I hope you'll join us. We do this again twice a month. The next one will be on April 18th and April 22nd, then 2 more times in May, et cetera, et cetera. And we're usually it's a small group, only 10, 15 people, sometimes even less. But we have centering prayer together. I try to present a little bit of material, and then we have some conversation. And the purpose here is to support each other in this practice. And I think that obviously the fact that you're here, that you're investing this time, shows that this practice matters to you. So let's support one another. I think it's certainly worth doing. So I just want to wrap up with the poem again. So I invite you to just close your eyes and listen, and then we'll say goodnight. The worst thing we ever did was put God in the sky, out of reach, pulling the divinity from the leaf, sifting out the holy from our bones, insisting God isn't, bursting dazzlement through everything we've made, a hard commitment to see as ordinary, stripping the sacred from everywhere to put in a cloud man elsewhere, prying closeness from your heart. The worst thing we ever did was take the dance and the song out of prayer, made it sit up straight and cross its legs, removed it of rejoicing, wiped clean its hip sway, its questions, its ecstatic yowl, its tears. The worst thing we ever did is pretend God isn't the easiest thing in this universe, available to every soul in every breath. Thank you, Shalon Harkins. Thanks to all of you. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, wonderful rest of the week. And I hope I'll see you again on April 18th. Good night.